how to be a rock star panel moderator. Let's face it, most panels stink. They're just really, really bad. Often they're like talking bobbleheads. And if you've ever been to a panel, you know that it's like plodding through a really bad public access TV show and your remote is broke and you can't switch the channel. I think the panel was created by someone who felt it was important to be 3 feet above everyone else, likes to talk with 3 to 5 of their friends on stage, while each takes a turn at the podium, and there's an audience of subordinates in the room who politely listen and appreciate the fact that they were invited to watch. That rarely happens. The best panels move fast. They're sprinkled with a little humor here and there. They're unpredictable conversations between a smart moderator who guides the experience, smart people on stage, and smart attendees in the audience. The real win is when you involve your audience early and often. Smart moderators get the attendees to participate by talking to each other and not just asking questions or answering panel questions. That's your goal, full participation by the audience. So let's start with a basic question. It sounds simplistic, sounds elementary, but we get this one wrong. Who is the panel for? Well, duh, it's for the audience. It is not for the panelist, and this is where we screw it up. So what's the purpose of a panel? Well, most people think the panel is there to share information. Really? I can get information online today. Why in the world would I want to pay to go see a panel to get information? So the real purpose of a panel typically should be to help the audience learn something new, to give them a takeaway that they can apply back personally or professionally, and to help them solve their pain points, the problems that they have. And so what is the purpose of the moderator? Well, think of it like a great rock star. Great rock musicians say they are there for their fans, and without their fans, they're nobody. So like a great rock star, a moderator is there for their audience, not for the panel. And the moderator is the audience advocate, manager, manages the time, manages the experience, manages the panel and the audience, and is the guide through the experience. So let's talk about 15 tips to become a rock star panel moderator. Number 1, and this one's critical, and this is where many people fail, don't over-prep the panel. Think about you gathering together with a group of your friends, and you're going to do some jamming in the garage. You're not really going to plan it all out like an orchestra that's going to perform in front of 15,000 people. You're just going to have an organic jam session. So avoid long calls and emails with too much information. Send 3 questions to the panelists that you're going to discuss and ask them, is there anything missing? Other than that, you want to keep from talking about the panel experience, even when you see each other on site during the panel, until the panel starts, so that the information feels authentic, genuine, and not scripted. Use the bit format. Divide your panel up into 3 parts, and this is point number 2, and it's critical. You want to do big picture thinking. Big picture thinking is that 30,000 feet. What's happening from 30,000 feet? Ask those panelists for that strategic bird's eye view. Then you want to go into the weeds, the eye. And you want to look at stories, anecdotes, steps, examples. This is where you can get into the weeds a little bit. And then this one's critical, and most panels don't do this, and this is what needs to happen. You want to have peer-to-peer discussions. After all the panelists have answered like question 1, you take that question to the audience, and you take the responses from the panelists, and you say to the audience, what's your reaction to what they've said? Turn to the person on your right or your left or at your table and have a conversation for the next 2 minutes about it. So use the bit format, big picture thinking, into the weeds, peer-to-peer discussions. Number 3, focus on the audience. Sounds simple, but this is where many people miss it. As you are acting as the audience advocate, you want to make sure that your panelists understand up front that it's all about the audience. It is not about the panelist. Remind them that without the audience, there is no panel. Otherwise, they could sit around and have coffee at a local shop. And as the moderator, you want to be watching the audience. You want to watch their body language and how they're reacting to what the panelists say. Number 4, at the beginning of your presentation, sit with your panelists. Now, this is really critical. You want to think about it from the audience's point of view. You're already probably sitting on a stage that's 3 feet off the ground, if not more. You want to remove podiums. No reason for anybody to be getting up and standing behind a podium. This is not a presidential debate. This is not a congressional hearing. Get rid of podiums. Remove tables and other barriers. You want to remove all of that so that it seems invitational and you can seem as much as a part of the audience and like one of their colleagues as possible. Number 5, connect with the audience. And you want to connect often and early. You want to, at the beginning, manage expectations. So you want to make an agreement with the audience. And in this agreement, you want to tell them that the panel is for them, not the panelist. You want to remind them that they have the right to use the law of motion, and if the panel goes in a direction that doesn't meet their needs, invite them to leave. You also want to tell them that learning is the goal, and you want them to walk away with a takeaway, and you want to tell them it's a safe space to agree, disagree, ponder, and question. Tell them that you're going to take questions throughout the panel, not just at the end. And then when you've gone through those type of things, ask the audience to give you a thumbs up if they're in agreement with you, or a thumbs down if they're not. Most of them will give you a thumbs up. Number 6, move to starting with the intros. Introduce the panelist. Some people let the panelists introduce themselves. It's much better if you introduce them and you keep them short. You keep those introductions brief, less than 30 seconds, maybe even 15 seconds. Who they are, what company they're with, and why they were chosen to be on the panel. If the panelists are going to do it, ask them to spend 30 to 60 seconds. That's it. Now, here's what's really interesting that you want to do next. You want to get the audience involved early and often. Ask the audience to turn to the people that they're sitting beside of, on the right or their left or in front of them or behind them, and ask them to introduce themselves to the peers around them. This is something different. This is a great networking tool. This also sets the stage that this presentation is going to use audience engagement. Number 7, you want to tell the audience with them. Before you move any further, you want to establish what's in it for me. What's in it for the audience? You want to give the audience context. Number 8, set the tone. You set the tone by listing 3 big questions that the panelists are going to discuss. And when you list these 3 big questions, go over them a couple times, then ask the audience to pick one of those questions that interests them the most. Which one of these questions resonates with them? And have them turn to a peer and tell the peer whether question 1, 2, or 3 interests them and why. Once again, you're getting your audience involved often and early, and you're setting the tone that this is about them. You're also connecting to the brain and having their brains look out for the answers to those questions. Number 9, involve the audience in the first 5 minutes. We've talked about this throughout all of it, and think about it. Good rock stars get their audience involved with sing-alongs. You know, the Grateful Dead is known for inviting pictures, inviting video, and you want to get that audience involved in the first 5 minutes. That lets them know that it's really about them. Number 10, start with the first question. You ask each panelist to respond. You go right down the line. Give the panelists 2 minutes to respond. You know, the first time you might want to go in sequential order, but the second time you do this, mix it up. You ask them not to repeat an answer. If panelist number 1 responds and panelist number 2 is going to respond with the same thing, tell them don't repeat the answer and don't say, I agree. Ask them to elaborate on it or to give concrete examples if necessary or to pass. Number 11, after the panelists have all responded to the question, then let the audience discuss their reactions to the panelist with a peer. This is the critical piece that will solidify learning and that they'll walk away and go, well, that was a different panel session. I got to participate. You have them turn to their neighbor on the right or their left and then discuss it with that peer. Give them 2 minutes max. Then you follow with a short audience debrief. Go out into the audience and ask for 1 or 2 volunteers to give you some feedback. Number 12, ask the audience if they have questions for the panelists. After you've done a debrief, say, let's take a couple questions. Anybody have questions for the panelists on this question that we just talked or the panelist comments? That way, questions are early. Number 13, rinse and repeat. You do the same process for question number 2. You do the same process for question number 3. Number 14, 10 minutes before the session ends, you want to start wrapping things up. Now, don't ask for any final thoughts. That's the lamest thing you can do, and we expect you to do that as an audience. So, moderator, instead, give each panelist 60 seconds to answer and lob these questions at them. What trends do you see in the next year for our industry? Or you might ask, what is your prediction about our industry for the next 5 years? This ends your panel on a high note instead of the panelists recapping what they've already said and repeating it again. Don't ask for final thoughts, as panelists will just restate what they've already said. You can recap the final thoughts, what they've already talked about, but if you ask those other questions, trends you see the next year, prediction about the industry in 5 years, it adds an interesting element to it. Finally, 5 minutes before the end, stop and ask your audience to complete the electronic survey. And if you're not doing evaluations of the panel as a whole, not of individual panelists, but of the whole session together, you are doing yourself a disservice, because how can you improve in the future if you don't do that? So if you follow these 15 tips, you'll be the rock star panel moderator. You'll almost be invisible because you'll keep the focus on the audience and the context of the content from the panelist upon the audience's needs. Thanks for participating and appreciate your time. Here's where my images came from. If you need more information, there's my contact information. You too can be a rock star moderator.